We're going to roll right along into our next panel, which is Empowering Canadian Enterprises for Ukrainian Endeavors. And this segment, this panel will be led by Her Excellency Ambassador Yulia Kovalyev. And on it, we have Leah Gilbert-Morris, Vice President, Public Affairs and International Relations for Export Development Canada, Elena Voloshina, Head of International Finance Corporation, IFC in Ukraine, John Moran, Senior Advisor, Office of DFC COO, Ukraine Recovery Initiatives. And online, we have joining us Artem Shevalev, Alternate Board Director at European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Supervisory Board Member at Privatbank. And Vladislav Rashkovan, Alternative Executive Director at International Monetary Fund. Thank you.
I actually think that this is the brightest Ukrainian Canadian that built the bridges between not only Ukraine and Canada, but also the other countries. And I was actually looking on Lena's presentation and about the new fund, which was a really remarkable success. The country which is fighting the war to be able to fundraise $350 million. But there is one thing I was really disappointed, that among all of the partners of this fund, there was no Canadian fund. And I think this is a road ahead. We can all work together. So for the next success of Horizon, for the new fund, there will be FinDev or ADC or the other Canadian representation there. And probably with that in mind, we will start our discussion. In my previous capacity long ago, before being ambassador, one of the most exciting jobs I had, I was the head of Ukrainian National Investment Council. And part of that was to work with many of the foreign investors coming to Ukraine, and really had a big success before the war, especially in Ukraine's renewable sector, when we had many of the foreign companies just before the war coming and building and investing billions of dollars into the energy sector, into the green transition, which is the path to go for all of us. So I'm here moderating this panel. I want to be as precise as possible. We've just heard Lena about the potential in Ukraine. Now on this panel, we have a really remarkable team who is doing a remarkable job on the ground. For many of the companies who are working in Ukraine, for the many foreign investors that are considering to invest in Ukraine. So I want to put our discussion in a very practical manner. So those of you here from Canada who have the questions, who will finance my investments in Ukraine? Who will ensure my investments in Ukraine? With whom should I reach today, even not tomorrow, don't postpone it. Here will be the team who will get all of your answers to these questions. And probably the first, I will start with Vladislav Rashkovan. Because for Ukraine, it's, I think, one of the other incredible story is that we are the first country who is fighting a conventional war, actually the biggest since the Second World War, but also the country who continues to do the structural reforms, and the country who have the IMF program. And Vladislav was very instrumental to help to build this program. So my question to you, Vladislav, and happy to see you, is why it is important for investors to look on the Ukraine having the IMF program and the 6th consecutive review of this program, and what are those important structural reforms we have in the current IMF program that will support the private sector coming to Ukraine?
And I'm Ambassador, happy to see you. Thanks for inviting, and and I fully join the previous speaker saying how much you have done in Ukraine and how much you do for Ukraine today. I think I have some sort of light on because of there is still a little bit of cold but sunny day in Washington. So answering your question, indeed, the Ukraine today is the first country where the fund operates during the war. And it was not easy, for the fund to decide to agree on that. The fund managed to change some internal policies to make it happen. And there was some path. We were the first international organization which supported Ukraine when the full-scale war started. And we provided money already early March after we organized the call that time between Kristalina Georgieva and the President Zelensky. And since then, we provided more than $10 billion to Ukraine. We're the third biggest donor to the country. But this is not, it's not about IMF, it's more about Ukraine. Every board, and Madam Ambassador, you mentioned 6 reviews. The 6th review will be in some weeks. We still have 5, but I'm sure we'll have 6 soon, and hopefully even more. And this is the first time when Ukraine went through this. In our like a 30 years cooperation with the fund. But when every time I come to the board, my board colleagues ask how this miracle happens, that Ukraine really not having a very successful track record in the previous years, how it goes now. And I usually answer this is not a miracle. This is a result of the work. It's a result of the work of the government, of the parliament, the president, of the civil society, of business, of people. And this shows also the resilience. And it also kills a lot of stereotypes, which also our enemies, including Russia, was building around Ukraine in the past. So there is a work. I don't know. I think I don't think I will disclose any confidential information now. But we came now with Artyom here from another meeting, which we have from early March 2022 with the Prime Minister and a small team around him, and we're meeting twice per week. Coordinating all the budgetary support for Ukraine in these 2.5 years. And our group, together with all government, etc., we managed to bring to Ukraine only budgetary support more than $100 billion already. And as I keep joking, we are starting counting the second 100. This is important because for Ukraine, as we know, this is existential risk. We are not only working on some fine-tuning of macro policies, which happens sometimes in the crisis. We are working on existential risk, and that's why all people take it so seriously and so diligently working on the reforms. And Ukraine, and I'm sure your other people were saying today about that, Ukraine is running now in parallel, not consequently, a lot of reforms. We are not only trying to win the war, and therefore where our army and our Rammstein partners help us, but also we're working on ensuring macro-financial stability. This is where the IMF is in the center of this, together with other G7 partners. We're working on the fast recovery in the last years, because if this recovery would not happen, all the foreign leaders would not be able even to come to Kyiv, because the roads and railway were so messy in the first weeks and months of the war. But we also need to think working more on modernization of the country. And this is where, without the investors, would be not possible. There is no public money in the world which would be able to cover all the financing needs for Ukrainian reconstruction. And that's why, the private investments are so important. And Olena Kasharna was just now saying how much, she does and how many other investors doing for Ukraine in that. So thanks for organizing this conference, and I'm happy, to continue discussing what would be my advices maybe further to the investors. Thanks, to make it practical.
Thank you, Vladislav, for what you're doing for Ukraine, because I think having the IMF program is also the important anchor for all of the other investors, understanding that it is a remarkable macroeconomic stability for the country who is fighting the war, for the country who has over 6 million people living abroad, for the country who has disrupted export routes back in 2022. So every time when I'm asking people, guess what's the inflation in Ukraine now? And the estimates of the people are far beyond 20%. But then when I'm saying the reality that we have one-digit inflation, that is one of the things that makes people in a very positive way surprised. And my second question will be to Artem Shevolov. Artem has been for many years, I won't even say how many, Artem, because we're still young with you, working in EBRD. EBRD is the single biggest, largest institutional investor into Ukraine's economy. In overall pre-war times, that was an average of 1 billion euros of EBRD investments in Ukraine. My question is, Artem, what's changed was EBRD activities in Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion, and what's today practically EBRD is offering to both critical energy in the other sectors in Ukraine and the foreign investors. I saw EBRD logo on Lena's presentation. I know myself a lot more, but please share what EBRD is now on the ground offering the businesses in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Yulia. Thank you, Your Excellency, and colleagues. Very happy to see you there. Look, for me, the answer is relatively simple. EBRD has done quite a lot. But it's about the big numbers. Look, Ukraine, of course, is fighting the biggest war in the European continent. So it's predominantly about budget finance. It's predominantly about making sure that our defense is well funded. And that is something that, unfortunately, EBRD cannot do because, by its nature, it's more of an investment organization that supports either private sector or public sector companies, but in real sector economy, not through direct budget finance. And that's where, as Vlad just explained, the direct budget finance was critical from the IMF, from the United States, from other G7 economies. That's what allowed us to stand strong in this last just over 2.5 years. But what EBRD has done is, I think we're now getting close to 4.5 billion euros since the full-scale invasion started in February 2022. Again, not to preempt the outcome of EBRD's board of directors meeting tomorrow, but tomorrow alone we will have 8 projects totaling in excess of 1 billion euros. And again, this is a demonstration of how much EBRD is focusing on Ukraine. Actually, strategically, what has been done is at the end of last year, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has approved an unprecedented step of general capital increase. And that is something that hasn't happened since 1996. And this general capital increase was predominantly focused to, well, it was designed to support EBRD's continued investment in Ukraine at the time of war and in post-war reconstruction. With that general capital increase, we are hoping to support up to 3 billion euros a year by 2026. Again, of course, it will depend heavily on the situation on the ground, but as an investment partner, EBRD is definitely there, both for Ukraine and for domestic and international investors. Canada has been a very valuable partner to the bank and to the Ukrainian investment in this, particularly this 2.5 years. The Canadian government has extended some very important coverage to the EBRD investment in Ukraine. Well, quite naturally, given the wartime pressures, EBRD's investment in this 2.5 years has been focused on public sector. So the companies like Ukrenergo, the national utility, grid utility, Ukrainian railways, Ukrainian hydropower. So again, the key public sector companies that make sure that the lights are on, the railway keeps functioning, the basic services are there. Going forward, we desperately want to support more private sector investment. Again, Lena has done tremendous job in making sure that it does happen. We have seen a major investment earlier this year in telecom, but there's definitely space for much more, and the EBRD is ready and willing to support investments. We do, of course, see that the uncertainty around the war action and let's call it the geopolitical uncertainty does affect business sentiment. We see a lot of delayed investments. We see that domestic Ukrainian investors are much more active compared to international investors. We hope that 2025 would allow to break that trend.
Thank you. Thank you, Artem, and thank you for your efforts being with us and EBRD. It's really remarkable. We are talking now about the billions of dollars that have been not only committed but dispersed into the projects in Ukraine during the wartime. So I think that there is another person in the room, Lena Voloshina. Lena is working in IFC, and IFC is the part of the World Bank who supports specifically the private sector. And my question to Lena is, there is probably a bit of the myth that when the country is in the wartime, there is no capital and there is not so much, financing tools to support the business and the investments in Ukraine. So can you please a bit of, destroy this myth? So what have you been doing for the private sector in Ukraine since the start of the war? And what are your plans for the next year? And the third thing, what are the challenges? You is working with the private sector every day in Ukraine on the ground. What the challenges you see that you face?
Thank you very much, Yulia. Thanks for having me over. I've been at all of the Ukraine Rebuild conferences in Canada, and I wouldn't miss that one, at this one. At the last one, I think I shared with you the fact that IFC Board of Directors has taken an unprecedented decision to continue financing Ukraine during the wartime. We've been giving a platform of $2 billion, of which IFC was to finance $1 billion of its own account and attract another $1 billion from donors. Today, I'm proud to say that 1.8 out of that $2 billion has already been invested. Thank you. The ratio turned out to be a little different. Actually, we've invested 1.5 on our own account, and much less came from in the form of blended finance from donors. But as of now, we've mobilized more than $700 million of donor funding. Canada is a small contributor. We would like to see more of support from Canada, but we do have some blended finance from the Canadian government as well, for which I would like to thank Canada. Thank you. Now, where has this money been deployed? About $500 million went to support export and import. Ukraine is very dependent on exports. We need export revenues. Ukraine also needs to import a lot of critical goods, so that's where the money went. This was done in partnership with several Ukrainian banks. About $500 million went to support Ukraine's agribusiness, because this is one of the key sectors of Ukrainian economy. So we supported the bigger and the smaller with various forms of instruments. As Lena said, thank you, Lena, we are the largest investor in Horizon Capital, and that allows us to go into the tech sector where we otherwise would not be so efficient on our own. So in partnership, not only did we finance Horizon itself, but we're also doing co-financing with Horizon Capital in smaller Ukrainian tech companies. Landmark transaction in the telecom sector. This was the first investment by IFC in telecom infrastructure space. We're entering into new areas. We have a healthy pipeline of about $1.1 billion of funding across different sectors, mostly agriculture, real estate, retail, construction materials. We're entering renewable energy space. So we're going to be looking more at what we can do in infrastructure. So looking really across the sectors. You've asked me about the challenges. I think our biggest challenge was first to find a de-risking mechanism. As a AAA institution, we cannot bear the full risk of the war, so we had to find a way how to de-risk. And one of the ways is to attract donor capital. Another way of de-risking was by partnering with other IFIs or DFIs, by partnering with local banks, through which we are reaching out to smaller and medium-sized companies. That was the second challenge. How do we reach out to more smaller and medium-sized companies? And this is where we provided the risk-sharing facilities to 4 financial institutions in Ukraine. And this way, these financial institutions could reach out to more smaller farmers, smaller women-led and owned businesses. And now we just signed 2 weeks ago, we signed the last transaction that's going to target mid-caps, because there is a lot of funding going for the small ones. There is a government support program, there is a lot of donor support to the tiny and small ones. It's mid-caps that we feel need support, especially in putting more of distributed energy generation capacities. So this is what we're currently doing. Our last challenge is there are still not enough projects in Ukraine. What we're trying to address that challenge is by launching what is in IFC terminology is called upstream. Basically, it's a joint project preparation. That is something that Canadian businesses that are interested in investing in Ukraine could also benefit from. Just to put it in a very simple explanation, give you an example. 2 of our client companies, MHP and Astarta, were thinking of embarking on new projects, one having to do with processing waste to energy, and in another case, it had to do with processing soya beans. And in both instances, we partnered early on, and we co-financed the project development. And then when the feasibility study was done, the business plan was prepared, that allowed us to finance the project going forward. So this is a relatively new approach, but we're going to be expanding that approach. If anyone in this room is interested, please come and talk to me. We'd be happy to discuss this approach.
Thank you, Lena. I think this is the remarkable story on how to help the businesses to build a project that can be financeable and that can work with the IFI's funding, and especially for the smaller business that wants to expand, that wants to increase, that is also a part of the kind of a support. So thanks for that. John, I just was a few months ago, like in August, in Kyiv, and I frankly would like to tell you, everybody in the business community is talking about DFC. So tell us, please, what DFC is doing in Ukraine that the business community in Kyiv is so excited. I've heard over 10 times from my friends and colleagues from the private sector. They are like, we have an MOU with DFC. We will be working with the DFC. DFC was with us on board. So first of all, you're really doing a remarkable job. But tell us, please, more. What is the engagement in DFC now in Ukraine? What are you offering to the business? And what are your activities on the ground?
Thank you very much, first of all, Ambassador, for that lead and for leaving a high bar. I hope I can meet it. Well, one of the things that we've already heard about both here at this panel and earlier today is there's a challenge the Ukrainian people and its government are obviously facing and surmounting much greater challenges. The biggest challenge, and are applauded for their courage and resilience. And from the public side and from the private sector as well, it's our mission and our duty almost to meet that, to try to meet that through innovation, through partnering, to learning how to work together to help Ukraine meet those challenges both now and in the future. And to that end, we've heard some of the things already about how different institutions, IFC, EBRD, DFC, EDC, but certainly the private sector can do that. With DFC, we're the U.S. Government Development Finance Institution, so we offer political risk insurance, we offer debt in the form of both direct loans and loan guarantees, equity, both direct equity, but through supporting private fund managers, including Horizon, who is, you've heard about it, and we know and we rely on, because those fund managers, like Lena and her team, are the kinds of fund managers who deploy capital in an innovative, pioneering way, but prudently, because ultimately it needs to be done so it can be replicated, so there can be sustainability, and so that it can lead to results for ultimately for the people of Ukraine in different ways. And so by what we've tried to do in DFC is we now have an overall portfolio of more than 1.7 billion. We've done more than $1 billion since 2022. You heard about we are sharing risk with IFC on the mid-cap loan portfolio guarantee, and that's very innovative and applaud. That's something that came to us through IFC, and we both had to work out how can it work, because we have our own respective requirements, and we were able to do it, not just now, but in the future. And we're working with a bank, private banks. We do that also just on a one-off basis with a number of banks on the SME side. And so the IFC partnership allowed us to go to mid-caps, which needed the capital that's already being addressed through risk-sharing facilities, not just with us, but in our case, we work with ProCredit, Raiffeisen, Bank Lviv, Credo Bank. I'm forgetting one or two, but we have a number of these, Bank Paris. But where we do is we serve as a collateral substitute to try to get those banks to increase their lending to sectors and to Ukrainian businesses and individuals who need capital but might not otherwise get it without the ability to share risk, the risk sharing that we and other IFIs and DFIs provide. So that's the idea, is how can we do that effectively? And one of the things I think people have heard about already, but I can elaborate a bit on, is with Aon and ARCS, the Fairfax Financial Holdings, Canadian company. I worked for Penny Pritzker. Ambassador Pritzker was the lead on for the special representative for Ukraine economic recovery. And she and my boss at DFC, Scott Nathan, said, look, private sector private market, please tell us what can be done. Are there things that we can do to make more of an impact into de-risk deals, particularly in the war risk cover? And Aon and ARCS, Fairfax Financial Holdings, came to us and with an idea like, how can we maybe model through the risk sharing guarantees you already have on the credit side, maybe in the political risk insurance side. So DFC now has done a $50 million reinsurance facility where we filled the gap with that had existed since the Russian invasion 2022, where the private reinsurance market had departed and there was no reinsurance market, so local insurers, very capable, but had very little capacity. We came in and filled that gap with $50 million so they could, the local insurer, ARCS, could provide war risk coverage to Ukrainian businesses, Ukrainian individuals, against the threat of Russian attack and war risk coverage, because we could assume that risk up to 90% on each cover, relying on that local insurer. So the idea there was, it wasn't an exclusive arrangement just with Fairfax and ARCS, it was also, or with Aon, but they met that challenge to us. And now I've seen in some of the international community discussions, that's a very interesting idea. How do we use that? How can we replicate that? Other insurance companies have come. We're trying to use that also to leverage the private market on the reinsurance side back in a way that hastens their return, so they can de-risk investment, not just now, but in the future, especially when recovery comes, and not just on war risk, but then other types of risks that might otherwise impede investment. So the idea is, how can we paper document, get familiar both with other institutions, other DFIs and IFIs. We've worked with BII, British International Investment, and Germans, the Dutch, certainly with EBRD and with EIB. But how do we get more familiar with ourselves so we can lay the scaffolding so that there's some we're awareness of what we can and what we can't do, but also then leveraging it and bringing in the private sector and really relying on the know-how and the expertise and the capital of the private sector ultimately, because we're filling in gaps and needs that are otherwise not met. And so that's really what we've been trying to do with partners in both the public sector and the private sector. And we've also financed deals. I don't want to, I mentioned Horizon on the equity side. We've financed MHP, was a big agriculture firm, $250 million. And we've done other credit and political risk insurance deals as direct insurer as well as the ARCS reinsurance facility that I mentioned that was brokered by Aon. Last thing I'll say is just for us, we've had I was in Kyiv in end of December with the first person from DFC who went out to establish a presence in Kyiv at our embassy. And we've had a revolving set of 3 people who've taken turns going out there, and we have finalized a person who will be out there hopefully in early 2025 as a permanent representative based in the U.S. Embassy Kyiv for DFC, who can really follow up on the ground and work with private and public partners in a more active way. But, you know, I said it was the last thing I was going to say. I'll say one last thing. I started with our predecessor, OPIC, back in 2000, and I was detailed from Treasury, our U.S. Treasury, to be the representative for then OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, for the Balkans after the Kosovo conflict ended. And the whole idea was how to attract countries of Southeast Europe into the EU and into the international community in a post-conflict environment. And here we're talking about similar dynamics, but more impressively to me is Ukraine has a war going on and an economic transition underway, and there's still investment going on. And that to me says, wow, that's pretty amazing, and is a testament to there are opportunities there, and there's investment going on, and institutions like ours and my colleagues are there to allow things to go forward that make sense, that deliver results for the people of Ukraine now, but more even equally importantly, in the future when peace finally comes, that will be there to really ramp up the private sector's engagement, capital flows, and in a way that's really truly catalytic and can meet the needs and the challenges that will exist. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now, not only me understanding the amazing job that DFC is working and why everybody is talking in Ukraine about DFC. And my question is also to Lee. We also heard from EBRD, from IFC, from DFC about the billions of dollars that have been committed to the projects in Ukraine. Many of those projects are the greenfield projects, which are continuing to build new facilities, including the companies like Astarta with Canadian investments. But overall, rebuilding of Ukraine will require a lot of efforts, but also the technology, but also the innovations, the experience, expertise, and the equipment from the top-notch sectors, including energy sector, including the agriculture sector, including many other sectors where Canada is strong. Can you please share for us and for Ukrainian businesses looking forward to work with Canadian companies and vice versa, how EDC are supporting those Canadian companies who want to work in Ukraine, who want to export their services and equipment in Ukraine, and for those Ukrainian companies who are also looking to work with their Canadian counterparts? What ADC is practically offering them?
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll heed your advice to be precise and practical, and if I'm not, you can keep me honest. I might start actually with a bit of an explanation of how EDC, or Export Development Canada, differs from the other four organizations that you've heard from already, in that we are Canada's official export credit agency. That means we have a very specific mandate to support Canadian trade. Everything we do must have a benefit that we can tie somehow back to Canada and Canadian trade. And that's no different than all of the classic export credit agency models around the world. What is different about EDC is that we do have flexibility within that mandate, more so than many other export credit agencies. And in addition to that, we have a very broad, I'll say, toolkit of solutions available to support Canadian businesses and their international buyers. That can range anywhere from the classic solutions that a typical ECA around the world, especially in Europe, provide, which is the guarantee support, where we operate through another financial institution and we guarantee their onward lending and capital to an operation, a buyer, a company. To credit insurance, which is a de-risking policy cover to ensure trade transactions. But we also do direct financing. And in fact, actually, that's a very defining characteristic of EDCs. We have a very large direct financing program. As well, we have investment equity capabilities. And then lastly, another part that is very relevant to this audience is in relation to our ability to provide knowledge solutions to businesses who are wanting to learn about opportunities, who are having a hard time navigating very specific challenges that they're seeing within a market, who are trying to work through challenging environmental, social, or governance issues that they're seeing within their business flows, or they're looking for connections on the ground. We have a network of global business representatives around the world, including specialists based in London and around Europe, actually, who are dedicated to supporting this type of advice giving to our Canadian companies and their foreign buyers, especially those in Ukraine. I think maybe what's relevant to note to this audience is, in addition to the knowledge, credit insurance is really the number one request that we are getting from Canadian businesses. Again, it's a de-risking insurance policy. It covers war risks, and it helps take the risk and transfer that on to EDC in the course of your business that you're conducting. And I would say probably over 90%, well over 90% of our uninterrupted support to trade transactions with Ukraine is in the credit insurance space. That's really the highest demand coming from Canadian businesses at this stage, in addition to that knowledge that they're seeking. I think maybe I'll comment one more way. We've sort of innovated EDC's approaches to make ourselves a little bit more agile and flexible and able to respond to the urgency with which we view all transactions in relation to Ukraine. So we have materially stretched our credit risk appetite, which enables us to take on risks that we typically would not within the realm of our regular risk appetite. That does not extend to ESG. We maintain our strong ESG risk appetite. We have essentially overhauled our triaging processes. So any transaction that comes in the door does not go on the regular sort of conveyor belt of processing. We bring it right into senior management triaging, and they go up to our executive committees so that there is broad visibility on the issues that we're seeing, on the opportunities that we're seeing, and all of that process helps us to hone our risk appetite and our knowledge and understanding of transactions in Ukraine on a real-time basis. And then the last thing I think I'll note here is that we have dedicated a stretch risk envelope up to $200 million to start to try and make it easier for these transactions to flow in relation to Ukraine. So We'll talk a little bit more this afternoon about some of the specific tools we've put in place, but they are there, and we are looking to work with Canadian businesses and their international buyers in Ukraine who are looking for that support.
Thank you, Leah. And I think there will be one ask, a big ask from many of the audience here, and those who were representing the success stories that Ukraine is going through during the wartime. We know that you have your subsidiary, FinDev. And I will be coming back to this issue as I've been doing for the last over 2 years, that it really will be important to expand the geographic of the work of FinDev on Ukraine. As to follow many of the other agencies, including from G7 countries, to be able to support many of the Canadian investments, a bit of concessional financing, and de-risking them through the institution you have. So that is, we will come back and forth to this question during this discussion.
Yeah, maybe I'll just make a quick comment there. I think it's important to note that there are a number of Canadian government officials in the audience here today. And so I think that that's an important message for you, Ambassador, to get out to that audience. It is an EDC that steers FinDev Canada's mandate, actually. It's FinDev Canada and in accordance with the direction of the Canadian government, and they do so jointly together. I do know that there's lots of attention on this issue. I think Laurie Kerr, the CEO of FinDev Canada, is busy these days, and I think that there's increasing expectations, especially heading into next year when Canada takes the helm of the G7.
Thank you, and thank you for this comment. As you've mentioned, the next year Canada's leadership in G7, and we've talked a lot. This conference and on many other platforms, the enormous damage to Ukraine's economy that Russia has brought. We know that there is a G7 commitment to transfer $50 billion of the interest on frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine's economy and to support our budget needs. I don't know whether many people know, but there was a lot of Canadian efforts in this decision to make happen, and we really appreciate Canadian leadership and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland's leadership on this file. But also we all understand that there is, as I think Vladislav rightly mentioned, there is no so huge money in the world to be able to support Ukraine's rebuilding from the government perspective. And the only way in how to successfully put on track Ukraine's rebuilding is to find those instruments to support the private sector stepping in, to support the private investors and the capital. And my question is to Vladislav. Vladislav, what is your thoughts on the instruments additional that needs to be in place in order to mobilize those capitals and in order to provide enough comfort for those newcomers and the new companies that are considering Ukraine as a point of their destination? What on the Ukraine's government perspective and the IFIs needs to be done?
Madam Ambassador, I think I will not open here something new for people here, but in reality, many instruments are in place, many organizations are in place, and I had in the beginning of the full-scale war some ideas, to create a special agency or even the bank for Ukrainian reconstruction. EBRD was not super happy with that idea, IFC as well, I believe. But my logic was that to make maybe the organization which would be owned by them. But in reality, the 2 years of the war, 2.5 years of the war, full-scale war showed that the institutions like EBRD, IFC, World Bank, EAB are pretty well structured to be at least some sort of trailblazers for and DFC for sure, for other donors. I think, and I will join here Elena Voloshin in her words. Apparently, there are not so many projects in Ukraine, especially the projects of the high scale. Before the meeting today with Prime Minister, we had a call with Alexei Kuleba, Vice Prime Minister on reconstruction. And we were discussing that we need to have projects which could be, from one side, not looking as a fantasy. They are not. We're not speaking about trillions of dollars, but at the same time, we're not speaking about only one school or two schools to rebuild, because it's important. The schools individual housing are important, but we need to go a little bit higher on the level, at least on the level of the cities, and to look at the cities in a holistic way. And for example, I like what Denmark, for example, is doing with Mykolaiv, and there is a good connection between the government or the regional government of Mykolaiv, the mayor of Mykolaiv, the governor of the region, the Ukrainian government, central government, the Agency for Reconstruction, and the donors like Denmark, which take these in holistic way and think about not only rebuilding how it was, but actually building new. And I think this is an important element for Ukraine. We don't need to rebuild old Tryeshina or old, the streets. We need to try to build the European cities in Ukraine, European roads, European railways, European airports, or the world-class airports, and this is what we need to do. So I will join probably Elena. Elena mentioned already. Elena Voloshin mentioned what they do as IFC with these projects, like project preparation facilities, which help even on the local level. To develop the project. So I would go even beyond that. I think the Canadian agencies and Canadian government can help to build similar organizations, in Ukraine, for also on a regional level, and in general, to invest in building institutions in Ukraine, including in education, because I think the lack of experts who could speak the same language with donors on the regional level will be one of the biggest obstacle, together with projects themselves, because someone should develop them. And in Kyiv, we have a lot of capacity. We have a lot of world-class experts, specialists who have a long-term expertise to work with other donors, countries, international organizations, big investors. But as soon as you go a little bit further, and you will go tomorrow, you will need to rebuild Southeast. I think we will have a lot of issues there. And Ukraine is a decentralized country. You cannot build these only from Kyiv. The majority of reconstruction of Ukraine will be in the regions. And I think another element, where we need to think more, and this is less for Canada, even if, Elena Voloshin mentioned that Canada is somehow a smaller donor for their projects. It's not in the case of IMF. Canada channeled a big portion of its financial support to Ukraine via the IMF administrative account. And I want to thank you, Madam Ambassador, also for your work on setting up this instrument in the previous years. And in general, the contribution of Canada is a part of this $150 billion of financial assurance, which IMF managed to secure for Ukraine in the last years. So again, I would like to advise the business, the Canadian business, to follow, to monitor what IMF says. I think in the next few weeks you will see another report on Ukraine. But I mentioned already the word trailblazer. I want you also to be some sort of trailblazers for others. You need to be, brave enough, like Ukrainians, also to come to Ukraine. For sure, there is a lot of work still to be done on the Ukrainian level, and therefore, including on the property rights, the rule of law. But we're working on this. This is a big part of the projects for European Union, for US government, for IMF, for World Bank, and think long term. Think long term, build institutions in Ukraine, build education, invest in people in Ukraine. This is, I think, what Olena Kasharna shows. She has a great team in Ukraine. Other businesses have a great team in Ukraine, and there are great people. So what I usually speak with foreign investors, I ask for empathy. I ask for this kind of empathy to Ukraine. Ukraine is a great country. There are great people. Believe in Ukraine as a future member of European Union. Believe me, it will make change. Ukraine will be modernized to be as a part of European Union. And what we need to work now a little bit more with European Union is to think how to anticipate the European Union funds for Ukraine even before we become the member of European Union. So this is what I would advise also, and to experiment. Experiment with different, not only working with, as I said, with the central people from Kyiv, but people working in the regions, believe me, there are great civil society in Ukraine, a lot of NGOs, a lot of think tanks. Don't only rely on the think tanks which are from abroad or rating agencies. There are a lot of people in Ukraine who can provide you a great analysis on the economy, on the regional level, on industry level, on sectoral level, on the city levels. There were a lot of granular data. The Olena Kasharna in the previous speech mentioned about digital. We're a very digitalized country, so there's a lot of open data in Ukraine, even during the war. So just work with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Vladislav. And building on one of your great insights, it's about the local communities. And actually what we saw about the resilience in Ukraine, it's not only the government, it's each and every community, especially those who were withstanding physically Russian tanks. The leaders of the community and the spirit of that communities were helping back to protect these cities. And today these people are on the forefront to lead, to rebuild their regions. We have today the head of the Kherson region with us. We are keen, and I'm really proud to say that this year we built these relations between our cities, communities, Ukrainian regions, and Canadian provinces. I'm very proud that the province, the oblast where I was born, Ivano-Frankivska, has the long-standing partnership with Alberta province. This year we celebrated 80 years of friendship between Odessa and Vancouver. So we are building this partnership because the communities and their rebuilding, they will need not only the capital, but they will need the advice. And they will need the shared approach, the innovative approach from the Canadian cities, from Canadian provinces on how they have how they develop the policies, how they build the services to their citizenship. And my question is to Artem, because I know that EBRD is not only working with the state-owned companies and private sector, I know that EBRD has been working also on the municipal level. So can you please also, Artem, share with us the experience EBRD has by supporting the local communities in Ukraine?
Thanks, Yulia. It's actually a perfect segue to the probably two blocks of messages that I wanted to share with you. One, it's essentially what Vlad was just talking about, capacity building. There are major municipalities in Ukraine that do have experience and that do have the financial strength to work with international investors or with the international financial institutions. For a vast majority of Ukrainian municipalities or local communities, the Ob'yednani Gromady, this is something which is science fiction. They magic. It's they have no idea how these things work. They've never tried, and we really need to help them. We really need to work all together, all the IFIs together, the bilateral donors, at building capacity to support the development of municipal finance in Ukraine. To be fair, this is not only about municipal finance. This is also about wider public sector investment. And again, as Vlad said, in anticipation of EU funds coming in. I mean, I've seen this happen in Central Eastern Europe or in the Baltics. it creates a separate class of professionals who know how these things are done. It may seem to be trivial. It may seem uninteresting, boring, bureaucratic, but it has to be done. You need to train these people in order to have an efficient system of using these funds. We are getting there. I think there will be March next year, we will have certain capacity building programs in order to support the development of projects in the public finance space. But again, even bilaterally, if you have any ideas, I'm talking to businesses in the room, do raise this with the Canadian embassy in Kiev, with your government. Ask them to address a specific capacity building need in Ukrainian municipalities. Linked to that are the issues of Ukrainian municipalities which are close to the front lines. There is a very specific issue of financial sustainability. Kharkiv is being bombed daily. It doesn't make it less of a city. It actually makes its people stronger, but it also means that the support that should be extended to Kharkiv or Kherson or Mykolaiv or Zaporizhia, it's very unlikely that it's a sustainable borrowing story. So it will have to rely heavily on grants. And there are two ways to approach that. One is, of course, bilateral grants. And again, this is something EBRD is doing. Despite our capital increase, we're still reaching out to bilateral donors specifically to address the needs of frontline cities and communities. But I really want to see the perpetrator pay. The Russian assets are still there in the world, in Europe, some of that in North America. We really need to work with our governments to make sure that Russia pays. We have made a small step. We have made a small step in mobilizing 50 billion for the ERA package to support Ukraine's immediate budgetary needs, but this is a drop in the ocean. Let's not forget that the 50 billion is covering an extended period of time. We do have access to at least 250 to 300 billion euros in Russian assets. And I do not see how the world would survive if some of that is not used, or mostly, ideally all of it, is not used to finance the needs of Ukraine. Again, there are ways to deal with that within international law. It doesn't have to be expropriation or confiscation. We can design a special levy on any future Russian trade after the peace, but this is not something to be left untouched for months or years to come. This is not a future issue. This is an issue that we need to start dealing with now so that we can finance the critical needs in Ukraine immediately.
Thank you, Artem, for bringing back the issue of Russian sovereign assets. And indeed, Canada and Canadian Parliament was among actually the first one to adopt the legislation which allows seizuring of Russian assets, Russian sanctioned assets. We also know that the former Senator Omidvar of Canadian Senate also tabled the legislation which allows even fostering procedure, speedy procedure to seizing Russian sovereign assets. And as we all are talking about the rebuilding and the restoration of Ukraine, this is a very legitimate source of funding to support Ukraine rebuild's efforts. But also, as we have like a last minute to talk, I wanted you to come out of this panel with the understanding that first, Ukraine is rebuilding now, and Ukraine's rebuilding starts the next minutes and hour after another Russian shelling. The second point I want you to leave from the panel is there is a lot of help for the businesses who want to come to Ukraine. There is the funding, there is the advice, there is a strong shoulder of major international financial institutions that work in Ukraine on the ground. And thank you also, DFC, for now saying that there will be a permanent representative of also the DFC in Ukraine, as I know that IFC, IMF, and EBRD have for decades their teams on the ground. So there is the financing. Thanks a lot for the cooperation between DFC and Fairfax. There is the war risk insurance already in Ukraine. If you want to know more about the opportunities of Ukraine, you have brilliant Olena Kozharna, which is talking now, brilliant Ukrainian Canadian who made a success story through all the challenges of the war. And thanks a lot, Lena, for that. You have also the chairmen of the board of two biggest energy companies in Ukraine, who are both Canadians, coming back and forth to Ukraine. So if you want to know more about the energy sector, you have the experts who are working in Ukraine. You have one of the best experts in Ukraine, who is Ukrainian business ombudsman, the former ambassador of Canada to Ukraine, Roman Vasyuk. And this are the people where I advise you, except for also our team in the embassy, to talk to, looking on the opportunities in Ukraine. And the last thing I want to share, I was really so touched and surprised. A few months ago, I met with the company. It's a like mid-sized company from Montreal, from Quebec, who, you remember the city of Irpin, which was significantly destroyed in the very first weeks of the war. This company is now doing the water treatment project in Irpin. And I want to expand their facilities and working with the other communities. So there is a chance and there is an opportunity for both the big, small, and medium companies. And there need to be courage. You need to be courage, and we Ukrainians can share part of our courage with you to make the decision to come to Ukraine. We would welcome more business delegations. We had the first business delegation this summer was Minister Ng to Ukraine, and we appreciate that, but we need more. You need to come to see the country. You need to come to talk with the business associations. We have from American Chamber of Commerce, European Business Association, Ukrainian SOUP, which is the Association of Ukrainian Businesses, CEO Club, and many others. Talk to your peers and see, and there is a lot of opportunity. The capital is here, and I hope in the next year, when we will have the rebuilding conference, we will have more success stories coming from that. Thank you, and thank you all the panelists.